My dad was not the normal kind of guy to have for a father. In the first place, he was a psychiatrist. I knew he'd grown up poor in Indiana, but there seemed to be many details he'd left out. What I knew best about him was that he'd won a Rhodes Scholarship before I was born. Dad worked hard, at factories and elsewhere, and he went to college on the GI Bill. Then he became a successful doctor, and, eventually, a shrink. But Dad wanted us to know, really know, about his childhood. So he left behind hard copies of some of his stories, telling about it, and a box of computer disks with files of the stories.
When I was a little child, my mother combed my long blonde hair and told me, "You would have made such a beautiful little girl."
When my father was very little, his family lived in a tent, in a whole community of temporary workers' families living in tents. Only my father's family had a piano in their tent because my grandmother loved to play the piano. Dad had his own ideas about a household that was normal. His father had been one of those people you read about who should have been put into gifted education.
My mother said my father was sort of a genius. He developed a bold plan. He would buy us some land and build a house for us. "Do you know how to build a house?" my mother asked. "Anybody can build a house," he answered. "Did you ever do it before?" she questioned. "Of course not, but any carpenter I've ever known was a dummy. If he can build a house, so can I. You'll see. Watch me."
Dad was a piano teacher's son, and some of the kids at school called him Sissy. This was wildly different from the father I grew up knowing.
I had begun to practice as a psychiatrist. I visited my mother, who lived across town. She said casually, "Honey, are you still going to see that other psychiatrist?" When I nodded, she said, "Well, honey, what do you talk about?" I regarded her thoughtfully. "Well, mostly I talk about you. You see, Mom, I haven't been able to be my own person all these years. I'm not trying to stop loving you, just trying to get more independent of you." I stopped then, for it sounded silly, even to me, even if it was true.
Our family was different from other families. In the first place, my dad was a psychiatrist. My mother said that my father was sort of a genius. My dad was not the normal kind of guy to have for a father. That's what makes the story of his childhood so interesting.